Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you back. Your host Adil Raja with my guest and friend Tony Gosling, who's an investigative journalist who's worked for the BBC. He runs his own radio show in Bristol. He's a very famous guy in Bristol. Let me tell you, I've been to Bristol. Every time I've been there, everyone I talk to knows him. So he's sort of the big deal in not only in Bristol, but in the National Union of Journalists as well. And today we are going to talk about a very contentious and controversial topic, which is in the news for some reason once again. And The Guardian did a story about it, which is very interesting. I found it interesting, at least. The Guardian finally talking about it. The secretive Bilderberg group just met, but who knows what global elite said. That is the thing. This is a secret group, the Bilderberg group, and these are the secret societies which are allegedly running the world we live in, but we are not allowed to discuss what they're actually discussing and what is actually going on. Not only this, but Declassified also did a story on it, because the MI6 chief, she also attended this meeting, and there's a history to this Bilderberg group meetings in which the global elite, particularly from the West, they meet. And in the recent meeting, we had the MI6 chief John Sowers, David Lammy, the deputy prime minister and the editor of The Economist, and Rishi Sunak, the former prime minister. He also attended the meeting. And the meeting is there was no agenda of the meeting. There are no official printout about the meeting. So there is a lot of commotion about the meeting. And why I'm talking to Tony about it, because firstly, Tony shared this very interesting piece with me, which is from the Labour Heartlands, and it discusses about the Bilderberg, the secret mandate by Paul Nax. Now, that's a very interesting piece in which he talks about what the 72nd Bilderberg meeting reveals about power without accountability. And well, it was discussed in the parliament as well, and Labour Heartlands posted about it, as you can see. And you can see what was discussed.
What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest you exercise it? To whom you're accountable? And how can we get rid of you? And if you can't get rid of the people who govern you, you don't live in a democratic system.
So that is really interesting. I mean, these questions have finally been raised in the parliament. And why Tony Gosling is talking about it? Because he wrote a book about the entire thing. The Traitors of Arnhem, Martin Bormann and Bilderberg Group. So he wrote a book about it, and the book is available on the eBay in case you choose to, and I would definitely recommend you to buy the book. And the book is available on eBay. But before you go and do that, please, let's ask Tony Gosling. Tony, first of all, explain to us, what is this Bilderberg group, man?
Right. Okay. Well, I first came across the Bilderbergers back in 1996 after leaving the BBC. And it's one of those things that I was rather shocked and surprised that I didn't know anything about. And I think if you talk to many journalists in London is where all the national and international news comes from in Britain. It'd be much better, I think, if there was more distribution around the country, but most of it is pretty much in London. The journalists just don't know anything about it. And the reason is because it's been censored over the years deliberately by the management and by the editors. For example, in the Financial Times back in the 1980s, their famous columnist, C. Gordon Tether, he would write about all sorts of financial affairs in the FT. And then he suddenly decided he wanted to write a couple of columns about the Bilderbergers. What happened? Well, the column never appeared. And he went to his editor. He said, why did you censor my column? And he wrote about the Bilderbergers again and the censorship in his next week's column. And that was censored too. And eventually he was sacked. So there is a definite attempt to keep this out of the news, out of the headlines, even though you've got the people in those meetings, secret meetings. They don't tell you where they're going to meet beforehand. We have to go and find them out with a bit of investigative journalism. that you have the people that control most of the money in the Western world. So you're talking about the very, very top bankers, the big industries, the arms industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the big media industries, anybody that's making lots of money at almost anything, including, say, for example, the boss of Ryanair is another one. The new wave of big companies that have taken over from some of the more traditional family businesses. They are there. They're in the meeting, and they're in there with the politicians and the military people too. But the point is to really understand is it's not the world at all. Maybe they are trying to take over the world. They might be, but the point is this is the NATO countries' political wing in a way. So if you look at the attendees, they're all from NATO countries. So since the Swedes joined NATO and Finland, you're seeing more people from Sweden and Finland popping up on these lists, around about 120. And traditionally, it was one of the major figures at the Bilderberg conferences was the former Secretary of State, the American Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. So he was a big figure. And what the purpose of the meetings is from these NATO countries seems to be several aspects to it. It's very difficult because they won't do press conferences. This is the thing I've always said, you should have a press conference at these meetings, but they would rather keep it hidden from the public. But the purpose is largely it's meeting the establishment elite, the deep state, if you want, with the intelligence services too, meeting up with people who are potential political candidates in the NATO countries in up and coming years. So, for example, with an up and coming French presidential election, a new candidate for the French president is likely to appear at the Bilderberg meeting. He goes down well, or she goes down well, and suddenly you find all of the newspapers start saying what a great person this is, and eventually they will become the next. There were two very, very clear and obvious people this happened to before they ever came to power. One is Tony Blair. He came to the Bilderberg conference just the year after he became Labour leader, and then a little while before he came Prime Minister. And another one is Bill Clinton. He came along to the Bilderberg conference literally the year before he became president. And so the idea, it seems, is there's a little club where they all get together. What they discuss, well, you look at their agenda, it's all security issues to do with the war. This latest meeting that we've just had, which took place in Washington, which we only had less than a week's notice of, and you just mentioned the Guardian article, but that came out on Tuesday this week, which is 2 days after the conference is finished. Right? Yeah. So there's no opportunity really to do a proper scrutiny. Everybody has already run away from the meeting. But there is one way, and Charlie Skelton, who wrote that, by the way, is a very good friend. He's been writing about them for many years. His full-time job is as a comedy writer, but he brings out the comic aspects of these conferences, the way that these people try and pretend that we don't know they're there. So in terms of what they actually decide and discuss, I've already said future political leaders, they get discussed there. But then, you've got royalty. We had the Dutch king and queen in this year's conference over in Washington. But the main purpose, it seems to me, is to provide a sort of escalator for politicians, media people, etc., to make it to the top because you agree with their consensus. And there was one person who went to these meetings, a former British Labour opposition leader, John Smith. He was very annoyed with them. Apparently, this is what I heard after the meeting. Back in the 1990s, he said that he wanted to bring a whole bunch of people to the next Bilderberg to give them a few lessons in economics. And unfortunately, in the next 6 or 8 months afterwards, he died of a heart attack. So he was never given a chance. And that's when Tony Blair came to power. So I think that's it in a nutshell. This is who they are. And the reason I wrote the book was because I was asked in 2000 to write a book about them, having first discovered them in the mid-1990s. But I said to Roger at Pluto Press, I said, look, I just don't understand them enough. Anyway, 25 years later, I do. And I've looked into the origins of this group. And probably the most shocking thing is that the chairman of the Bilderberg group for the first 20 years was a former SS officer from the Nazis. And so his name was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, although he was a Dutch prince. He was German aristocracy. He'd married into the Dutch royal family, and he was a member of the SS before the Second World War. So the idea that you've got this benign conference where people are just speaking off the record, they're not speaking to the press. They're there in, so for example, Blaise Metroelli, the Director General of MI6, was there, and she supposedly is talking in a private capacity. She just happens to be the Director General of MI6. So in a nutshell, that's what we're dealing with. It's a small cabal of the deep state, and the idea is that the public and the press are not supposed to know anything about it. So how can this sort of thing be allowed in a democracy? Well, the answer is it isn't. In the United States, the Logan Act says that any politicians that appear, such as Scott Bessent, who it seems was at this year's meeting, they have to recuse themselves. They're not allowed to go to such meetings without allowing full disclosure of the minutes, etc. And so they're breaking the law. American politicians that go to these meetings, the other thing to say about it is that because you've got so many media moguls in there, you're talking about people who are very serious in Germany, in the United States, in the UK. So it won't be Rupert Murdoch that goes, but it will be one of his general managers, for example, that goes along to these meetings. They make sure they write nothing about it. And they, in fact, I would say they even help suppress the information. So it's almost like this is one of those things in journalism you start to understand. Many journalists think they know what's going on. They think they know it all. But one of the things I learned as a journalist, Adil, is how little we know. And the Bilderbergers prove that there is another structure of power in the Western world, particularly in the NATO countries, which we know nothing about.
Very interesting, Tony. So, Tony, I mean, so far we've heard the stories of secret societies ruling the world we live in, but it seems to be a reality with this story coming out in the open. I mean, the story was out there in the open for quite some time now. But what is the role of these secret societies and cults who are waging a war against God, as you put it, and who are trying to rule the world? Are they, I mean, they have been successful in the past for the last, let's say, 5 decades or so, after Second World War, or maybe even before that. But what role do you see they're playing in the modern world we live in today?
Right. Well, look, first of all, secret societies and cults, right? Let's start with cults. Something is a cult if you have to swear a blood oath to join it. I mean, say, for example, in India, the Thuggis were a cult. This was an assassination cult. And they are very different to just an ordinary sort of friendly group of people who just happen to meet. Or even a church, for example, where people are there openly chatting away and they don't have to swear an oath to protect the secrets of their organization and to deny that they're going to be they're a member of it. And so the other side of this is secret societies. Well, there has been just legislation just passed in Britain to say that all police have to declare if they're Freemasons. And let me tell you, my investigations into the Bilderberg show that there are some key bits of evidence that Freemasons are in the driving seat at Bilderberg meetings. So the guy that set up the Bilderberg conference was a Polish guy, Joseph Rettinger. He was known as the Eminence Grise, working for MI6 just after World War II. He was a Freemason. The other person we know, because often you don't know, so we know he was, and he was the guy that set it up in the 1950s. Another one is Andrew Palmer, who was the organizer of the 1998 Bilderberg conference. He was the private secretary to the Grand Master of United Grand Lodge Freemasons in London at Covent Garden. And so we know that this is a Masonic organization. I think it seems to me I mean, there may well be people who are invited along who are not, but right on the spine of the Bilderberg conference is got Freemasonry written all over it. And of course, maybe other Freemasons within the press and elsewhere are part of the cover-up, because they are told, well, you mustn't report on this. This is part of your oath that you've sworn. But remember, they do swear blood oaths in Freemasonry, just as they do in things like witchcraft, in order to protect the secrets of the craft and to deny and protect that they're actually members of the craft. So it's good to see that the British government apparently is trying to find out if the police are Freemasons, but there's no clarity whatsoever in whether or not they can enforce that. So if someone just doesn't declare it, how will they know? It's not the easiest thing to find out. So yeah, I mean, it seems to me there are two sort of general attitudes of people in this world, that they want power for themselves, and they see their job as accumulating prestige, finance, power to themselves, and they set that above the rest of humanity. And there are others of us who see things in a different way. In other words, we are more public spirited. So we see the public roles, particularly in public service. We are paid by the public, therefore we're public servants. But I think any of the individuals who are supposedly working for the public, whether it's members of parliament, members of national banks, members of national broadcasters, for example. We had somebody recently from Ofcom, the media regulator in Britain. These are supposed to be public servants, and so they should never ever go to one of these meetings without coming out at the end of it and talking to all the journalists about what's been said inside. Because within public service, there is no room for secrecy. You're a public servant. You should be telling people exactly what you do. There might be a little bit of a role, maybe in the intelligence services, so long as there's some proper scrutiny of it for secrecy. But actually, when it comes to things like media regulation, there's absolutely no excuse for them going in there. And you're right, it has been discussed a bit in Parliament over the years. You played a clip of the Labour MP, Tony Benn, who was a Christian socialist. He was very, very good at this sort of thing. And there was also, a few years ago, Michael Meacher, another Labour MP. He brought it up in Parliament, and he was saying he was trying to find out how this is funded and why members of Parliament are going to these meetings without declaring it in their members' interests, and also without coming to the House to explain the discussions and what's been going on. But these people thrive on secrecy. And let me tell you, the way I look at it, Adil, is you've got a war party out there, warmongers, people who make a lot of money from war. Let's look at what Trump's been doing with Iran. I mean, he's telling his mates insider deals about where I'm about to say this, I'm about to say that. So they're making a fortune out of these threats and bombing of Iran. And this is of course fraud and crime, this insider trading, insider dealing. But there is a war party out there who's making a lot of capital, making a lot of money out of creating wars. But they interact with this sort of Bilderberg intellectual party. So you'll see quite a lot of the people, for example, from the US Treasury, from the US National Security Council in charge of the money and the budgets for the US wars. They're inside the Bilderberg meeting too. The thing is, I think many of the people that go along, even the chief executives of big companies like Pfizer, the pharmaceutical guys that are there, they don't necessarily know who in that meeting is one of the war party, who is planning the war. They don't necessarily know that. And this goes right the way back to the early Bilderberg conferences in the 1950s, where Manfred Petrich, who's a lovely German blogger, financier from Switzerland, we met him over many years at the Bilderberg conferences. He's sadly not with us anymore. But Manfred explained in the early Bilderberg meetings in the late 1950s, there were at least 3 serious Nazi war criminals in the meetings. And you've got the British Labour opposition leader, Hugh Gateskill, for example, sitting next to a Nazi war criminal. But he didn't know he was a Nazi war criminal because it wasn't exposed until more recently, their role in World War II. So I think this organisation has got to be more exposed, and they go to great lengths. So this year, almost every year they meet between May and June, roughly. This year is about 6 weeks early, which shows me that this is all really forming around the Iran war that Trump has launched. So you'll find people like Mark Carney. He was slated to go to this meeting, although he wasn't on the final list. The Prime Minister of Canada, former Governor of the Bank of England, very much an elitist. And so you can see why people will want to go to a Bilderberg conference. Trump is not. He's an outsider. He's not part of this. And so they're there to say, well, Trump is going crazy. What are we going to do? What should we do? But so they're putting themselves out there to the small elite circle that they work in as the sensible guys in the room. But secretly, they've got all of the war party, all of the nutters are in there too. It's just that they don't necessarily know who they are. So it's a very manipulative, very powerful group that I think is behind. I mean, certainly they're behind the things like the European Union. That's quite clear over the decades. They were the people that started the European Economic Community, the EEC, which is now We've now got its own president, the president of Europe. Plus, they were behind the euro, the creating of the euro currencies at Bilderberg, and that things like the Kosovo War. This was discussed at the Bilderberg conference before it started, as well as the Iraq War. That was also discussed at Bilderberg before it actually started. So, how do they know these wars are about to break out? That's what I want to know. It seems to me you've got really here a NATO political elite that really throw disdain on this whole concept of democracy, and they see the rest of the public around the world as stupid, to be manipulated. They see themselves as gods almost. This is our world. We're going to do what we want.
Well, Tony, they're not the only one who sees themselves as gods or prophets, maybe. But we'll come to that later. Once
people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who talk like this, they go to these Bilderberg conferences. Thiel was on the steering committee.
Yeah, the anti-fascist Peter Thiel you're talking about. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so we were discussing about you were talking about Freemasons. Tony, I've noticed this. Freemasons are openly and publicly, what they're doing is that they are advertising the membership, the Freemasons here in the UK. Why do you think they're doing that?
Well, they're suffering a collapse of membership. I think over the years, okay, so Freemasonry started, some would argue that actually it was underground for maybe 200 years around Elizabethan times. So it was very much woven in with the Reformation, the replacement of the Catholics by the Protestants, and also by the creation of the British Empire under Elizabeth and John Dee, who was Elizabeth's secret agent, and also people like Francis Bacon were very much involved in the creation of the New World in America, and also the launching of the British Empire with a very powerful navy that was going out bullying around the world in Elizabethan times, with people like Walter Raleigh, Francis Drake, and these privateers who the Queen could say, oh, well, I had nothing to do with them. But of course, they were secretly working for the British Crown, and Dee and Bacon and people like this. So that's how I think Freemasonry really started. And then, of course, also in the English Civil War in the 1600s, mid 1600s, with Oliver Cromwell, there's a lot of evidence that the people involved that were secretly Freemasons, and that Cromwell himself was. They were very against the Catholic Church, who condemned Freemasonry at the time, and apparently still does. So then it officially came onto the scene in the 1700s. That's what they'll tell you. So I think a lot had been going on beforehand, but then they decided to make it official. And this was to do with something called the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. So in the 1700s, you got the beginning of a real opening up of science. In order to build the factories, to come up with all the inventions, the things like the steam engine, all the other things that made for an industrial revolution, you needed to free up science. And the Freemasons were the was the place where this took place, because even then the church was a very powerful organization. And if you questioned the biblical teachings or interpretation of the Bible at the time, you could get into all sorts of trouble. So hence people started joining these Masonic lodges so that they could have free discussions in private, and that they wouldn't leak out and they wouldn't get into too much trouble. So that's how Freemasonry started, with quite a worthy cause in a way. and some of the early trade unions even behaved using these oaths of secrecy in their small groups. But over the years, of course, the Industrial Revolution was used for all sorts of nefarious purposes, wasn't it? It didn't really benefit the ordinary people here in the UK. It was a way of launching the empire, taking over countries abroad, grabbing resources all around the world. And since that time, in a way, Masonry has become redundant, hasn't it? I mean, it's so, but it's still there. And so people who are greedy and want to abuse power, they want to have, for example, friends who are in the police who will protect them, they join the Freemasons. And that, I think, is why the Masons have suffered from a lot of people leaving, feeling disillusioned, actually being repulsed by some of the things they see in there. And I myself know a former British Army officer who was in the Royal Engineers. He was a Freemason. And because he was a very moral character, he was a Christian Mason, if you can believe that. Apparently, British Masonry was nominally Christian, and the Grand Orient on the continent in Germany and France, etc., that was more atheist. So anyway, he was thrown out of the Freemasons because he was too moral, and so somebody else took over his lodge. So you can see how it's been working over the years. Hopefully, that gives you a bit of insight. The modern Freemasonry really is, I think, a criminal enterprise. For example, the mass murderer in Norway, Anders Breivik, about 10 years ago, he murdered a whole bunch of young socialist school children on an island. Really, this is the future of the socialist left-wing party in Norway. Were all murdered by this guy. Well, he was a Freemason. And would you believe the Norwegian authorities said, oh, he was just a lone wolf? Well, hang on. Is he? Because he's meeting all of his friends in his Freemason lodge. And also he was a Zionist as well. So these questions need to be answered, and these lodges need to be opened. In fact, I think, first of all, I'd say nobody in any public office should be allowed to be a Freemason. That is good to see the British police being told that. They need to declare it, but they shouldn't be allowed to be, because remember, when you join the Masons, you're swearing an oath to them, which is a way of saying, well, I'm going to stick up two fingers to the public, because my loyalty is to the lodge. My loyalty is to the master and the Grand Master. It's not to the public. So that's why they've had all sorts of problems with recruiting and membership, the fees. If people don't see some advantage, because most people join the Masons because they think they're going to get some sort of privilege, promotion at work, this sort of thing. And if they don't get it, they leave. And I think it's become a sort of morally bankrupt zone. For example, if you go to a Masonic ceremony, you'll find that the Masonic temples are in darkened rooms. They have no windows, and you will have to go through a ceremony with sometimes just one candlelight, even in the middle of the day, and the rest of the temple is pitch black, which you can imagine is quite spooky. So I don't think people really see this as a progressive organization anymore, and I don't think that many people believe that it's in any way religious in a true sense. In other words, that it's about God, public service. It's not. It's about secrecy, and it's about privilege. It's about promotion, and it's all about power. People that want power, and that's why I think the Freemasonry is now recruiting, is because it's gone right downhill. It's now basically in the gutter, and it's very difficult to get anyone to stay there.
All right, Tony, talking about the secret societies and the God syndrome, Donald J. Trump, President Trump, in fact, posted this very, I would call it funny, but he won't call it funny. He posted this, image, AI-generated image, in which he definitely is looking like Jesus Christ with the light in his hand, and with the sick man looking like Jeffrey Epstein, maybe. But anyway, that must not have been his intention. But there's been a lot of commotion about it, and people have been talking about it, and he had to backtrack, saying that, well, I was portraying to be a doctor, maybe, a doctor, and it was in support of the Red Cross. But another secret society, and I haven't heard much about it, the Knights Templars
Yeah.
very famous, legendary secret society. The Knights Templars, practically, I mean, they've been supporting President Trump all along, but they came out and they spoke against President Trump, this depiction of himself as Jesus Christ. So, what do you have to tell us about Knights Templar, and what do you have to tell us about? We'll also talk about President Trump's, narcissistic God syndrome, which gets him the headlines like the Mirror recently wrote. In fact, in the 5th of April, they said Trump is a weak, unhinged bully. He has lost the plot and is now losing the war. I mean, that is the general sentiment anyway, and there's a rise of anti-American sentiment because of that. So, tell us about this Knights Templar?
Well, look, just have a look at the picture for a start. Right, just above, I don't know if you can zoom in, but just above Trump's head there, you've got a demon.
Yeah, that's there.
Why is a demon in there? That's not very godly. On his left-hand side there, you've got the Statue of Liberty, which many people would say is an image of the Babylonian Semiramis goddess, the prostitute and the wife of Nimrod. So, the Statue of Liberty, who is it? So this is, and also, of course, to have these jet aircraft about to kill you, heading towards you, and somebody there being healed. Well, it's a very strange image. I think, in a way, it's a sort of Mickey take of the religious aspects, as Trump did over the Easter period. He was taking the Mickey, wasn't he, about Allah, saying, So he's. I think these people are secularists, maybe so far as satanic or Luciferian, but certainly they're not taking God seriously. This is an image of ego. This is the word that speaks out through this image. This is an egotist, somebody who thinks that they're going to save people, and it may be that it's simply a depiction of a kind of Christian Zionist attitude that there is in the United States right now, particularly amongst the leadership. Many of the people that he initially appointed when he became president are now being replaced by Christian Zionists. Obviously, Huckabee, who's his ambassador over in the Middle East, he's a Christian Zionist, a vehement one. Pete Hegseth is a Christian Zionist. Now, this philosophy of Christian Zionism is a total heresy. It's not biblical. It's nothing to do with God. It's all about, what it is all about, is about creating a war, creating the book of Revelation and a massive Armageddon war. So, the basis of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not kill, first one. And actually, no, the second one, love God first. And they're just breaking these. And what they're saying is we are godless, but we don't care, because we're still going to try and pretend that we are somehow doing God's work. No, they're not. What they're doing is they're taking things like the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, the Olivet Discourse in the New Testament, which talks about the end of the world, and they are twisting it to try and make themselves the good guys, even though they are on the side of evil. And so that, I think, is what this is really depicting. And it's like, again, sticking two fingers up at the world and saying, look, we're in charge, we're the gods now. And this, of course, is one of their approaches. The ego can be inflated in humans, as we saw with Adolf Hitler, to such an extent that people come to believe that they're gods, particularly if they losing touch with the actual real faiths and what they really pursue. So as they get more and more power and more ego, it seems to me that these people are convincing themselves they're gods. Well, they're not gods. They're antichrists. They're evil. They're the enemies of Earth. They're actually the enemies of humanity, Adil, because what they're aligning themselves with, particularly with the Israelis and the United States, is the mass murder of medics, the mass murder of journalists, the deliberate targeting of medics, the deliberate targeting of journalists, in order to destroy our ability to communicate, to heal, and to do all those things which God has charged us to do. So anyone that actually pays attention can see that Mr. Donald Trump is indeed unhinged. I mean, I would say twisted. He's lost the plot. Well, maybe he's just reading a script, and maybe he doesn't really care anymore. It doesn't have to make sense. As George Orwell said in 1984, you find that we get to a stage where you're not expected to engage with what's going on. You're expected to switch off because it doesn't make sense. It won't make sense. It's exactly the same as the Iraq war, this Iran war. It's all based on lies. And they've decided they're going to do a war. And then what they've done is they've said, right, well, we're going to pay someone to come up with an excuse and a reason why we did it. And I think that's really obvious with this Iran war. Is not only is it illegal, not only is it unprovoked, it's also no plan. And so it seems to me you've got an elite that's painted themselves into a corner. But what they've still got left is their ego and their big-headedness and their arrogance. And their small circles, are only contain people who have this approach. And anyone else who's on the outside, again, a bit like a cult or a secret society, well, they can just get stuffed because we're in charge.
I would like to come to the part where Asim Munir's favorite field marshal, which is Trump's favorite field marshal, Asim Munir, is trying to broker a deal, and the U.S. Trump administration is fully behind it, and they're making no secret of it. But the guy is hated, let me say it quite clearly, in his own country. We know it. He's working against the 90% people who voted for Imran Khan and put him in jail. But let's come to that a bit later. But the second last topic, what do you think prompted the Knights Templar to issue a statement against Trump?
Well, the Templars are an interesting lot, aren't they? And they've got to tread carefully. The Templars are a historic organisation, and they would say they've got few links. But I can tell you, here in Bristol, we had the first public initiation of a Knights Templar ever since the 1300s, when they were extinguished, in St Mary Redcliffe Church here. I think it was around about 2008 or maybe 7. The first time any Templar had been initiated in public in their own church. They call it the Templar Cathedral here. So the Knights Templar were formed by the Vatican back in the 1200s, I believe it was, and they were basically used as the Vatican's own private army. They set up churches all around Europe. Bristol is a Templar port. London is, and Temple, where the legal profession are based, one of the bases of the legal profession in London, that was formerly the Templar Temple in London. Edinburgh is another one. La Rochelle was one of the biggest in France, but they're peppered all across Europe, and they were the first financial network, the first multinational bankers, and they were also a private army. But the thing is, they were also exposed as a satanic organization by the French king, Philip the Fair, in the early 1300s, and he had Jacques de Molay, who was their Grand Master, again, run like a secret society. He had Jacques de Molay arrested. They were tortured, but then there was also evidence given voluntarily by Knights Templar who were turning Queen's evidence, and they described some of the various disgusting rituals that they did in order to profane Christ. So they weren't actually real Christians. And then, it's just like the Masons. People might join innocently, but then they find that the actual practices and procedures as they go on through their role as a Knights Templar are all the opposite of why they thought they joined. So the reason that I think that they've now condemned Trump is because what you've now got, I think, is these two parties, and the Templars are more the Bilderberg party. I would call them the intellectual party and the war party in Freemasonry. So you've got the war maniacs, of which Hexeth, Trump, etc. are part of that. And then you've also, and obviously the financiers of the war, the people who are paying for it all, the arms companies, these people who are benefiting from the war. But then you've got this intellectual party, which is a Venn diagram, and you've got a kind of cross section that meet at Bilderberg, along with all of the intellectual types. And the Templars will be part of the intellectual field, most likely. It's very difficult to know. But there are, and I've met some of the modern Templars. I remember asking one of them in our church here in Bristol when this initiation ceremony was going on. he had they all have this red cross on their gowns, their capes, right?
Yeah,
And one of them had a cross, which was two crosses. So it was one line, if you imagine one line down, and then two red crosses across on his white cape. And I said, well, why have you got that? What's that for? And he just walked past me. He didn't say anything. But his friend said, oh, he's in a NATO lodge. And I was thinking, wow, NATO, Knights Templars? That's interesting. So you can see that if you're a Knights Templar, you would be taking the position right now of somebody like Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, who was at this Bilderberg conference, who they're trying to come across as the sensible guys in the room. And that's why I think the Templars have denounced this, because there will be many people, Christian Zionists, who the Templars largely are, who see what Trump is doing as actually dangerous and very difficult. And so they want to keep their people on board because Trump is part of the, in a way, a sort of Netanyahu maniac brigade. Now, these are, if you wanted to just call them something, the easiest thing to call them is the Lords of Chaos. You can call them the War Party if you want, but they're the ones who are there to create the chaos, which in the future, the sensible guys, the Antichrist, they'll come along and say, oh, we need peace. We need peace. So you can understand that the Masons are always like this. And if you go into a Masonic lodge, on the carpet, on the floor, you'll find a checkerboard. And so if you think about the game of chess, they want to control both sides of the chessboard. They want to be the black pieces and the white pieces. So you could even compare it to black magic and white magic. But the black side, this is Trump, this is Hexeth, this is Netanyahu. The white side, it seems to me, are the sensible guys. The guys are, big industrialists, media people, the king and queen. We want to be seen as the sensible people, even though, of course, they are actually in bed, whether they know it or not, with the war party. And it is complex. And that's why it's interesting that the Templars have come out with this, because they are, of course, a cult as well, a secret society. Not anybody can join. You've got to be asked to join. And Bristol is a major. Many of the ex-Templar ports and Templar cities around the world, there's a big one in Portugal, in Tomar, for example, are places where the Templars still hang out today. And they may say that they haven't really any connection with the evil satanic cult of the Middle Ages, but I could tell you a lot of the ideas are very similar. And you don't need me to tell you that. Just look at what's happening in the world today. It's like another crusade, isn't it, in Israel, and another attempt to take over Jerusalem. So don't tell me you're nothing to do with these crazy medieval knights.
Well, it's very interesting because the Knights Templars website, which is visible right now, the AI image, I believe, or the imagery shows the Knights Templar during crusades in the Middle East, obviously. So it is obviously directed at the Jerusalem, and it is obviously linked to Israel, the way it is, working. But it's a separate topic. Moving forward, the final topic, I would love to pick your brain about this situation in which the Pakistani dictator Asim Munir, who is known as the favorite field marshal by an unhinged bully, they say, Trump. Well, Trump is being termed as an unhinged bully by the Western press, especially the British press, right? And Trump's being an unhinged bully, his favorite field marshal is also an unhinged bully who has placed Imran Khan in jail, for whom 90% of the people of Pakistan have voted for. So, but the unhinged bully is working to broker a peace deal. How do you think that will play out?
Well, I think we can understand a lot better now why Imran Khan was removed from the scene. Because the Americans, I think, want to control the pinnacle. If you want to use the term Illuminati, you can do, because, of course, this is their modus operandi, is they don't care about the millions of people below. They are only interested in controlling and manipulating the handful of senior figures at the very top of the tree. And so that's why you've now got a Pakistani leadership which is really subservient to the US Unified Command System, which is quite openly says we want to control the whole world. The various they've got things like AFRICOM, they've got SOUTHCOM for South America, they've got CENTCOM. So these various organisations, which are really just connected to the Pentagon, they want to, and one of their major objectives is to control politics in every country. We've just seen in Eastern Europe a massive amount of money going into getting rid of Viktor Orban in Hungary, who's a nationalist. We've also seen lots of time and effort going into preventing a nationalist leader last year becoming president in Romania, and he was then banned from the election. So there's lots and lots of work is going in by the United States, mainly CIA and the Unified Command Systems, the military Pentagon side, in order to prevent countries having their own leaderships. We've had the same here in Britain, haven't we, with Jeremy Corbyn being prevented from standing. It would almost certainly have won if he hadn't been bullied and targeted by his own party, by infiltrators within his own Labour Party. And so Pakistan, I'm afraid, has just fallen to the same system where Imran is in jail, even though he's actually the rightful leader of the country. Democracy is sidelined because the American power plays rely on compliant traitors. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but people who are prepared to sell out millions of their population for an easy ride with American money and American geopolitics, American strategy. And they don't care where the American geostrategy and geopolitics is running. It might mean that the Americans have planned to have a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, but that doesn't concern them. They're really only concerned for their own health and their own political survival and their own financial survival. And they are prepared to sell out their entire country, including their rightful political leaders, in order to stay in with the Americans. And this, of course, is the sort of tactic the Americans have developed for many years in Chicago with the Chicago Mafia, controlling the Chicago Police Department, controlling the Chicago Mayor's office, with assassinations, with bullying, with threats, with bribery, with blackmail. And these are the techniques which the CIA and the Americans have been using around the world in order to make sure that they have compliant, pliable, friendly leaders. The only thing is, of course, by doing that, these leaders are setting their millions of their population and billions in some cases of their population up for decisions which are being made abroad, maybe in Washington, maybe in London, maybe in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, but not at home. And so they are traitors. I mean, that's just who they are. And that's the handshake that you see between the Americans and the senior leaders in Pakistan. These are handshakes of traitors to their nations. I think, what the thing is, we do not know exactly what they're planning. We know about this, obviously, but we don't know what they're planning for the future. And I think we need to know that. And I think if we did know that, it's hence the secrecy. If we did know what they were planning for Britain's future, for example, we would not be still doing deals with the Americans and shaking hands with them at the Bilderberg conferences or anywhere else. Just imagine now, we have now got a European economy and a world economy which is being collapsed deliberately by the Americans, destroyed by the Americans, the energy markets, which will kill our economy off. And you know what? The British don't even have the ability to fight back against the Americans anymore. I mean, aircraft that we developed, like our fleet of Harrier jump jets, which are a fantastic, brilliant airplane, which was designed in the 1970s and out in the 90s and has been out fighting various places like the Falklands, I believe they were. They're a fantastic aircraft. The Americans have bought them all and taken them over to America. We've got none left. All we've got is these useless, stupid American F-35s, which, if they want to, they can switch the thing off in mid-flight. The same with the British nuclear deterrent, the Trident nuclear missiles the British have got. The Americans, if they don't like it, they can just switch a switch and the thing will just fizzle and drop in the sea, or maybe even turn the way the Americans want. We don't really know. The last two tests, by the way, from the submarines, the nuclear submarines of nuclear ballistic missiles from the Royal Navy, both have been failures. In fact, one of them was supposed to go into the North Atlantic somewhere. It started veering off course towards America, and it dropped in the Gulf of Mexico. So the British do not really have any real armed forces to speak of. That's because of this Illuminati style control at the very top of politics, and the sellout, the treachery. And it's not just Pakistan that's been going on, Adil. It's over here too, and in many other countries around the world where the Americans, I mean, look at poor old South America. They have had a hell of a time over the years. They try and elect a leader that represents the people. The Americans assassinate them. The Africans have had the same sort of thing with the Europeans, the big Belgian mining companies. And this is another thing to say about the Bilderberg conference, is there is now a trial of the former Bilderberg chairman, Etienne Davignon, going on in Belgium. He's on trial for the murder of Patrice Lumumba, who was the first president of the Belgian Congo. He was a super bloke. If you ever find his speeches, very powerful speeches, incredibly articulate, well-educated guy. Well, Etienne Davignon, the Bilderberg chairman, is now on trial for his murder. And this, of course, is what the way that neo-colonialism happened after World War II. Is the European powers started pulling out of Africa and saying, it's okay, you've got your independence now. It's just that if you elect someone we don't like, we're going to kill them. So, of course, that's neo-colonialism, having puppet dictators all around, or even prime ministers, people who are elected. But they're puppets all around these former colonies, including, of course, your own Pakistan.
Yeah, final thing, Tony, but very briefly, Jeffrey Epstein's file, the Epstein file clearly mentions that Imran Khan is as much greater threat to peace than Erdogan, Khomeini, Xi, or Putin. That's what they said, all right? So Imran Khan was definitely what you said, that these were the secret societies, which we were talking about, and these cults, I would say, they were instrumental in removing Imran Khan by using the Pakistani military. So who is the Pakistani military really, or the Pakistani generals really working for?
Well, if you go to Ukraine, you'll find all the people who organized the Maidan coup in 2014 were the top Freemasons in Ukraine. So people like Viktor Pinchuk, who's an oligarch, he's also happens to be the Grand Master of the #1 lodge in Ukraine. Yatsenyuk, who became the first prime minister, he is also in the same lodge. This is, I think, the way the CIA organizes things, is through these secret societies and through these Masonic lodges. When it comes to Pakistan, of course, one has to wonder how on earth the people can wrest back control of their country. And maybe the only way is simply going to be through exposing this, because the secrecy is their big weak point, I think. The idea that there are secret associations between individuals that are not talked about, secret plans and secret policies, secret cults that they're in. These things need to be proven first and then exposed. And this is a tough job. So, for example, we've just had a Bilderberg conference. It's very difficult to know who in there is part of a cult and who isn't. And it may be, maybe all of them are, but it's most likely that they're co-opting in people into this sort of groupthink. So, Russia is terrible. Imran Khan is a bad guy. Iran is evil. Actually, most of the time, what I'm finding, I don't know about you, but so, for example, with the Israelis, all the things that our Western elites are accusing their enemies of, the Iranians, the Palestinians, whoever it happens to be, Khan, they are guilty of themselves. So this is what they call satanic inversion. The idea is, in satanic circles, when you're feeling, oh no, we're vulnerable on this. So, for example, with the murder of journalists and medics by the Israelis, they start to accuse the other side of doing this in order to try and, this is a form of psychological warfare. And of course, we're seeing a lot of this with the Iran war, a lot of psychological warfare, fantastic amount of it, in fact. And so the idea is you don't necessarily beat people militarily, you beat them through the press and the media. But you know what? I'm not sure that's really going to work. They are one of the problem with these egotistical, powerful types, the Bilderbergers, your your army in Pakistan, Trump, obviously, is they tend to believe their own propaganda. And actually, when the rubber hits the road, as it's now doing in Iran, you might well find that they have a terrible price to pay, because they've just convinced themselves of their omnipotence. They keep telling themselves, I'm not a megalomaniac, but they are megalomaniacs. And of course, we know what happens to people like that. Pride comes before a fall.
No doubt about that. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Tony Gosling. The reason I've displayed the picture of the Pakistani dictators all along the history of 70, 80-year history of Pakistan with the US president is because you need to know who the masters are. And masters are never friends, they are masters. And who has put Imran Khan in jail? Let's have no doubt about it. And now we have got evidence in the shape of Jeffrey Epstein's files, which have been leaked, and in which Imran Khan was seen as a threat by the Epstein class. And he's paying the price. Not only Imran Khan is paying the price, but the entire Pakistani population is paying the price. With that, I would bid you farewell.
Because they're saying he's a threat to peace. The fact is, they are the only threat to peace. He is the one who can bring peace, and that's why they're afraid of him. So let's do everything we can to bring him back into public life.
Most definitely. Thank you, Tony Gosling, for joining us. See you very soon.
Thank you.